What's up, everyone? We're back with another fantasy football video. Week 6 strategy. Buy low, sell high, waiver wire additions, and drops. In this video, I will cover all of that as well as some key points regarding bye weeks coming up this week and what to do if you have a winning versus a losing record. So if you're interested, please consider like, commenting, or subscribing to the channel. I talk fantasy football as well as a wide variety of other content too. Check it out in the description if you're interested. So real quick, before we get into week 6, I want to recap some of my buy low, sell highs from week 5. So buy lows that I was right about. Buying low on Myles Gaskin. Buying low on Darrell Henderson. DeAndre Hopkins. Kyle Pitts. And the Los Angeles Rams defense were all players and positions I said to buy low on. I was wrong about TJ Hawkinson and Chase Edmonds for this week, but I'm still fairly confident that they will turn around as the season goes along. And then for sell high, who I was right about, I said to sell high on Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones. By the way, the quarterback position, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I've pretty much nailed the players that you should sell high on throughout this whole season, so check that out if you're interested. Other players I said to sell high on: J.D. McKissick, Cordarelle Patterson, decreased performance from last game, and he's got a bye. Kenny Golladay, unfortunately, got injured. And then A.J. Green. Players I was wrong about included Jamar Chase. Buffalo Bills defense against Kansas City was actually the best performing defense last week, and then Dalton Schultz. But I still got a fair amount of those points fairly right. So for bye weeks, we've got this week, so I'm adding 2 new additions to this video regarding bye weeks and what to do if you have a winning record. So first I want to go into bye weeks. The teams on bye for this week are the Atlanta Falcons, the New Orleans Saints, the New York Jets, and the San Francisco 49ers. So in this video, I'm going to talk players specifically impacted by buys and what you should do with them. Today's is going to be a running back feature position. So buy low is players I'm saying to take advantage of on their bye week and try to buy onto your team. The guy I like is Michael Carter, running back for the New York Jets. He's not been very impressive so far this season, but he is the lead running back on this team, and he is standing out compared to Ty Johnson and Tevin Coleman. He's a great addition to buy, especially if you have a fairly decent record so far this season and you can afford to be patient with him. I like him off this week 6 buy as somebody you could pick up. Buy. So these are guys that I am willing to trade away. And the guy that I'm willing to trade away on a buy is Mike Davis. To a degree, Cordarelle Patterson is like this as well, but I've talked about him quite a bit. Mike Davis has been fairly fortunate by some touchdown regression that has benefited in his favor. His performance has been very, very ineffective so far this season, and I think that coming off a bye, you should take advantage of some good weeks that he's had so far and try to flip him. Then the last one is buy. No, that is not an Instinct reference for those of you that know that. But this is somebody that I would recommend you to just get off your team entirely, and that is Trey Sermon. Trey Sermon is somebody who's going into his week 6 bye who has not only been ineffective when he's had the playing time, but he's also lost time to Kyle Juszczyk 2 weeks ago, and then this week he only had 1 carry with Elijah Mitchell. They're getting Jeff Wilson Jr. back in the near future, and going into week 6, you do not need to continue to roster Sermon if you have him. So that's my buy addition. Going to do that for the bye weeks. And then my next one is going to be winners versus losers. So this is a player I'm going to specifically talk about with regards to ways that you can manage them differently depending on if you have a winning record versus a losing record. The feature player for today is Dalvin Cook. So Dalvin Cook, his average draft position was right around the number 2 or 3 player taken off the board. Unlike Christian McCaffrey, which has been relatively straightforward in terms of management because he's been injured and you know what to expect, Dalvin Cook has had an in-out situation regarding an ankle sprain that has been very nagging. And if you have a losing record, a lot of it might be due to Dalvin Cook if you do not already have Alexander Mattison as a handcuff. So if you do have Mattison, disregard this information because you have a guy that you can put it as an insurance. But if you have Dalvin Cook without Mattison, what you should do with him depends on your strategy. If you have a record of 1-4 or 0-5 heading into this week, I would recommend you try to trade away Dalvin Cook. I think what's going to happen is in week 6, I would not be surprised at all if Minnesota decides to rest him again, get some extra rest before the bye week in week 7. And to be honest, if you're a team that you haven't won yet this season or you only won once, you need to try to see if you can trade Dalvin Cook for some players that can help you win now. Ideally, you want to be targeting somebody like Cook in this situation because he's a good asset to have down the road, but you need to start getting wins in order to make yourself competitive to even get in the playoffs. For those of you that have a winning record, I would argue 3-2 or higher, I would try to buy low on Dalvin Cook. The reason I say this is because he is somebody that you can spend some flex assets for a player who's desperate, who, let's say they're 0-5, and they could be willing to part with Cook because they need to get wins. And if you're willing to part with some significant flex players or even your RB2, I would recommend picking up Dalvin Cook because this is a potential league-winning asset that you can get relatively cheap because a lot of people have a lot of questions of what he will look like the rest of the season. I would recommend in this situation, if you have a winning record, to target Dalvin Cook, but if you have a losing record, to attempt to trade him away. So that's winners versus losers for this week. And I'm going to be looking at that as well in terms of what you do when you have a winning record or a losing record. And I will talk this as well in some of my buy low, sell high positions coming up. So all that being said, we now go to buy low positions, and I go through all the positions on the team: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defense. And kickers, just disregard kickers. I think if you want more information about my opinion of kickers, check out the video in the description below. So, buy low quarterbacks. I would recommend trying to buy low on Ryan Tannehill. He has had 2 relatively mediocre weeks. Last week was not a good week for him. But we look at what's coming up the next 2 weeks on the schedule. They've got Kansas City and Buffalo. And Tennessee is going to need to throw in that game to keep up with those teams' offense. So if you... And the other thing to consider is that A.J. Brown has been limited with hamstring injuries and Julio Jones has been out. They should be getting healthy in the next few weeks. Ryan Tannehill is going to have better performances than he did in this past game against Jacksonville. A lot of why he had bad performances is because, 1, they have Derrick Henry and they could run the ball. And 2, they were playing bad teams that allowed them to use Derrick Henry to just run the ball nonstop. So when the schedule toughens up for them, they are going to need to rely on Tannehill more, and I think he will have better games moving forward. Other players to consider as well. So Matt Ryan off a bye week because he is it's another position where he's learning a new offense, but his points per game is increasing over the last few weeks. He's going to get Calvin Ridley back, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But Matt Ryan is a potential guy that if you have space on your roster, he may be worth trading for on a week 6 bye where he's not playing this week for somebody who might not need him. And then other players to consider as well, and I would do this if you have winning rosters, as I talked about earlier, is consider a buy low on Russell Wilson, who's going to be out the next few weeks with injuries. That owner may not be willing to hold on to him. And then Justin Fields, who looks like he's going to be a project, has not performed well in fantasy so far this season, but with a guy like that who has rushing ability and the clear athleticism that made him drafted as high as he was, it's worth taking advantage of if you have the ability to afford to wait on him. Buy low running backs for this week. So I talked Dalvin Cook already, not going to go too much into that. Another one that I really like heading into week 6 is Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor has not had a breakout game yet, but he is showing that he is more involved, especially over the last few weeks. We'll see how Monday night goes. This is being recorded during the game. But the takeaway here is that they play Houston in week 6, and that is a great bounce back opportunity. So if you're in a position where, you have some running backs that are out like Alvin Kamara or, even Cordarelle Patterson, you could consider a buy low on Taylor depending on how Monday night goes and whatnot, because he's been relatively mediocre this season. The owner may be impatient with him as well. Other guys that I really like, the Denver running backs, Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. I like them because Denver is a team that has an identity around running the football, and these guys have been relatively poor performing this season because they're splitting each other's touches so much. But they do have an improved schedule over the next few weeks that should make them better buys. So you take a look at they've got a few tough matchups on the schedule leading up to week 8, but they do have a favorable one in week 6 against Las Vegas that should help their numbers. But from week 8 to 18, they play Kansas City twice, which is a team that obviously got some defensive problems right now. The Chargers twice, which is a team that just got gashed by the Browns. They also play Washington, Dallas, Detroit, and Cincinnati in their second half of the season, which are all matchups against defenses that are definitely beatable. So my recommendation is that, especially for Javonte Williams, try to see if you can buy low on these Denver running backs because I think they will have better value as the season goes along. Other guys to consider as well. So Damien Harris, it's going to depend on his knee injury and what to kind of make of him going forward. But I think he is definitely a good buy low candidate to consider because they've got some favorable matchups as well as the season goes along. Josh Jacobs, another one as well. I like Jacobs as a buy low guy because he's getting the majority of the volume. Led the team in touches. I believe he had 16. The next guy had 5. Very, very good share of the workload there for Josh Jacobs. He's been relatively poor performing, but again, some good matchups over the next few weeks. He's still got Kansas City twice, Cincinnati, Dallas, and Philadelphia as matchups moving forward for them that are all potentially beatable. Other guys that I like as buy low running backs are the Buffalo running backs, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. Those are good guys to consider buying low on because from week 8 to week 10, they have the Miami Dolphins, Jacksonville Jaguars, and New York Jets, which all look like very bad teams and are all very likely to be in a situation where Buffalo runs them out of the gym, even though it's a field, not a gym. But essentially, they're going to be running the ball a lot on these teams, and especially there's a lot of buys from week 8 to week 10. These are good guys to consider buying low on to help cover you for that period of time. Other guys that I like buying low on as well include Miles Sanders if you have a winning record. Miles Sanders has been very underperforming this season, but he looks as if he is still the lead back. There's a lot of controversy there of who the lead back is. I was high on Gainwell, but he was not used very much in this Carolina game. I think Sanders still has talent, and if you have a spot on your bench that you have a good enough record and you're willing to leave Sanders there, he could return some good value for you. They're going to be playing Washington later this season twice, and that could be a good opportunity for you to potentially cash in on some value late in the season when you get to the playoffs. Buy low wide receivers. My number one buy low receiver is Calvin Ridley. I've talked about this before, so I won't go into it in too much depth, but I like Ridley because coming off of a game in which he didn't play in London, then he's got a week 6 bye. People are going to be impatient with him because of the fact that he's, 1, been a little underperforming, and 2, has been out for 2 straight weeks. So they might be willing to part with him, but Ridley has a very favorable stretch the rest of the way that includes some very good matchups. So for Calvin Ridley, they've got Miami right after the bye, which is about as good of a matchup as you can get. Just look at what Tampa Bay did to Miami on Sunday. And then the second half of the season, they also play Dallas, Jacksonville, Tampa Bay again, San Francisco, Detroit, and Buffalo. So I expect that Calvin Ridley will be a great second half performer. Really like him as a buy low candidate. Other guys that I like are DJ Moore. DJ Moore is in a similar situation where he has a very nice schedule down the stretch that includes the Buccaneers twice as well. But DJ Moore is the number 1 receiver on this team. That he had a hiccup for whatever reason against Philadelphia, but I think that he will bounce back, especially when Christian McCaffrey gets healthy. I think that will open up some more opportunity for him to stand out. Good buy low receiver to consider. Another guy I really like, Terry McLaurin. He's a good buy low receiver against Kansas City for 1, but then 2, this guy is heavily targeted. Went up against Marshawn Lattimore last week against the Saints, so that obviously had an impact on his performance. But Washington is going to lean heavily on this guy, especially since the rest of their receiving core is banged up and dealing with multiple injuries and just general lack of talent. And then some other players to consider buying low on as well. I'm going to talk about them briefly, but I'm going to talk about another category of players in a sec. Jaylen Waddle, because of the opportunity potentially there in Miami. Jamison Crowder in New York had a bad week, going on a bye, but potentially good PPR value later this season. And then Hunter Renfrow off a game that was not entirely impressive because of the consistency that he generally can provide. So some players that I want to talk about that are good buy low candidates, but also sell high candidates depending on your winning record or not. So Keenan Allen, Allen Robinson, Laviska Shenault, and Michael Thomas. Those are, and then Jerry Jeudy as well. I'm going to lump into that too. So those are all guys that, for whatever reason, are big enough names that you feel compelled to play them to some degree. And I'm talking about guys like Keenan Allen, Allen Robinson. Other players in this category are people that are injured and have not played yet that you might not be patient enough to hold on to. Jerry Jeudy and Michael Thomas. And then another one is Laviska Shenault, who's a project but has got opportunity within his system to eventually break out if they can get the coaching scheme right to get him involved, but that's another thing. So those are all guys that if you have a winning record, it's worth buying into those 5 players, or one of those 5 players. You don't want to buy all of them. But I think those would all be good buy low candidates because they have the ability to reap potential value for you. But if you're in a losing situation like 1-4, maybe even 2-3, although that's kind of that 2 and 3 is a little bit, you kind of have to. It depends on some of your buys and how close you are to the playoff threshold to really start panicking yet. But those are some guys that I would try to sell for more consistent value. Renfrow is a guy I mentioned who can give you consistent value. Another one I like is Courtland Sutton, who is holding his own as Denver's top receiving target while Jeudy is out. Michael Pittman, another one to consider too. So those are all guys to consider potentially trading for if you have a losing record and you need to get rid of one of those players. Buy low tight ends. On tight end, I like to buy low Darren Waller. He's got a pretty rough stretch the last few games, but still heavily involved in the Raiders' offense. I think that they've played some tough defensive matchups too the last few weeks. I think he will get more involved, especially as you've got Kansas City twice and some other good matchups later on in the schedule. Other guys I like to buy low for tight end are Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is in a good position with the Baltimore Ravens, where he is highly productive but hasn't had a touchdown yet. Getting a lot of volume, and I think as the touchdown receptions come, his value will increase more. So try to buy low on him while he's still not really standing out as a top 10 tight end just yet. Defenses to buy low on. Hopefully you bought low on the Rams like I told you to, because that matchup is even more juicier, I guess, for lack of better words, now that they are facing the Giants without Saquon and Daniel Jones. But yeah, so other defense I like to buy low on. The Saints, if you're willing to hold through the bye week, they're the top 3 defense. Did not play very well against Washington for whatever reason, but I think they will be still a solid defense to moving forward if you're willing to hold on to them. And Tampa Bay has been relatively mediocre compared to where they've been drafted, but they've got some very nice matchups over the next few weeks, including Philadelphia, Chicago, and New Orleans. New Orleans, you never know what you're getting with Jameis Winston, so consider that. Sell high players. Took a little while to get through the buy low, but I wanted to talk through those winning and losing situations for some of those players. But now we go to our sell high candidates. And I continue to advocate for this. I won't really talk about it too much in depth, but try to sell Tom Brady off a 5-touchdown game. Tom Brady, what he's doing is impressive, but he is, I'm telling you, this is not going to be sustainable the whole season. He is a 44-year-old quarterback. He will wear down as the season goes along. There will also be games in which they will need to utilize the running game more or rely on the defense more. There will also be games in the cold that he might not play as well. So just some some considerations to think about with this team is that, they just went up against Miami, which looks like a terrible defense. It's kind of ironic because we thought it would be a good defense to start the season. But if you could get a great player off a name like Brady, especially if you have a serviceable backup, try to see if you could flip Brady for a better player for you. That's not any indication of him being a bad fantasy asset, but you could flip it into some better flex value, in my opinion. Jameis Winston, another player to consider selling, because he's coming off a great game against Washington, but to me, it's not really worth rostering him during the bye week. So he's subsequently going to get talking about later. But I think you want to try to see if you can sell somebody like this off a good game because he's inconsistent. Sell high running backs. So Cordarelle Patterson, I've already talked about him. Still, I would recommend trying to sell him. I want to talk Myles Gaskin as a sell high candidate. I know I just had him as a buy low last week, but this is part of the economics of fantasy football. You don't often have starting running backs with a 0.2 point game. And you want to try to buy low on opportunities on somebody like that. And now that he's had a 2 touchdown game that he's receiving, I think it's a good opportunity to try to sell him. So the takeaway with this Miami team is that they are not good at running the football. And Myles Gaskin is not exactly a good runner of the football in terms of early downs. They've kind of relied on Malcolm Brown for that. They're going up against Jacksonville in week 6, which is a team that is not good, and there's very well a possibility that Miami could be running the ball heavily and not involving Myles Gaskin. They also were down against the Buccaneers and often throwing to Myles Gaskin. So it's going to be a game script thing where he's going to be good in situations where they're losing, but he's also been very inconsistent, so I would try to flip him off a good game personally. Other guys I'd recommend trying to sell include Antonio Gibson. So I've recommended buying low on Antonio Gibson, but I think that based on the upcoming schedule, it would be a good idea to try to sell him. So Gibson is more of an early down back. They tend to involve J.D. McKissic more in the passing downs. And the next 3 weeks, they are most likely going to be losing these games. They play Kansas City, Green Bay, and Denver. So those are all potentially games in which Gibson could struggle. Then they have the bye week. And then in the week after that, they've got Tampa Bay, which is one of the best run defenses in football. So you're looking at a potential 5-week stretch of Antonio Gibson struggling. So that could be a good opportunity to try to sell him, especially on a game like this past week where he had 2 touchdowns. But you have to be getting good value for him because I do ultimately like him as a running back to own rest of season. But the middle stretch there that I just said is going to be tough for him. Other potential sell high guys include Aaron Jones, if you can get a elite running back for him. So an example I'm thinking of off the top of my head is, for whatever reason, if Alvin Kamara is made available because he's on a bye week and somebody's 0-5 and they don't want to hold on to him, then I would definitely try to trade Aaron Jones for him. You want to try to be getting a running back for Aaron Jones if you are going to deal him for somebody that is clearly getting the full workload. Because Aaron Jones, he is touchdown dependent for one, and two, he's splitting touches more now with A.J. Dillon. I'm not at all saying that you should panic and try to trade Aaron Jones, but I'm just saying is that if you can potentially flip him for a more consistent every down back that's getting his full team carries and also at an elite level, I would definitely try to do that. Especially if you don't own A.J. Dillon, personally. And then other guys to consider selling, Samaje Perine had a very good game, but Joe Mixon was injured and recovering from his injury. I don't think that he will have games like that moving forward. Elijah Mitchell, I've talked about this already with San Francisco. You can check out yesterday's video, but I think this is a sell-high situation because Trey Lance is running the football and just the backfield being a mess. And then Alexander Mattison, if you don't already own Cook, I think this is a good situation where you could potentially try to sell him to the Cook owner and get more consistent value that you can rely upon the whole season. I think that would be a very smart move to make. And the Cook owner should want him too, because ultimately they're not going to want to be playing that game of like, oh, is Cook going to play or not play? So they're going to want Mattison. Try to see if you can get a good running back return. Yeah. And then sell high wide receivers. So a lot of these guys, go back to the buy low where I talk the players that depend on your record because I think that dictates a lot of these decisions. But other guys I like to sell high, the Bucs wide receivers, Antonio Brown and Mike Evans. One, they're playing Miami. Two, Antonio Brown has been highly inconsistent this season, and this was by far his best game. I would personally, again, flip these guys if you can get consistent value like a Hopkins, like a Hill, like a Stephon Diggs, but not if you're just trying to get somebody. I don't think you trade these players for like Keenan Allen, for example. I would not do that. Amari Cooper, he's another guy I would try to sell high because Dallas is a team that is doing well running the football, and when they get ahead, they don't really need to pass as much as the trend that I've kind of noticed. So Cooper is a highly inconsistent player, in my opinion. I think I like Lamb more as the guy that could step up as the eventual consistent wide receiver. One, Cooper only had 3 receptions in this game, but he did have a touchdown that salvaged his performance. Try to see if you could sell him off an amazing week 1 that he had that is still keeping him around the top 20 wide receivers. See if you can get somebody more consistent for him. Emmanuel Sanders, top 15 wide receiver right now. I do not think that's sustainable personally. I would try to flip him for somebody else. And then, because a lot of this is that when they get up on these teams, like that stretch I was talking about with the running backs where they're playing 3 really bad teams in a row, Miami, Jacksonville, and the Jets, that Sanders is not going to have that many opportunities again like that. Mecole Hardman, consider selling high on him. They've got Washington next week, which could be a good matchup for him, but Hardman is very inconsistent, and he had a decent game last week, so if you're still rostering him, maybe consider flipping him. And OBJ, honestly, he should just be dropped, but because of his name value, somebody may want him thinking that he's still recovering from his injury and then going to go back to his form with the Giants, but that's not going to happen. If it didn't happen against the Chargers with how many points they put up, it's not going to happen unless there's an outlier situation where you probably didn't start him in the first place, so just better to sell him and get him off your roster. Tight ends to sell. I would try to sell Kyle Pitts personally. I think he did have a great game, and I did say to buy him the previous week, but I think this is a good opportunity to try to flip him off the buy. I think there's some people that are really believing this guy is jumping into the same form that he had, but he has been inconsistent with Russell Gage and Calvin Ridley there. I would personally not. I would try to see what you can get for Pitts personally. Dawson Knox, I talked about this last week. I'm not going to go into too much depth, but he is very lucky right now off of a high touchdown percentage per catch that I just don't think is sustainable. I would try to flip him. And then other guys, the Eagles tight ends, because these guys are continually overhyped but just keep eating into each other's value. And they honestly should be dropped, which I'm going to talk about them in a sec, but try to see if you can flip them because they do have some name value. Tyler Higbee, another guy I would try to sell because not performing particularly well so far. And he's had some good games, but he's also had some very inconsistent games. And the only reason his game was good was because he had a touchdown off 2 receptions. And I would just personally not deal with that. And then defenses to consider selling. There's not really a lot of great candidates, but I would consider the Eagles because they had a very good performance against Carolina, but they get Tampa Bay next week, or Minnesota because they have a bye in week 7 and they had a good matchup the previous week. So those are teams to consider. Waiver wire additions. Going to be a little longer video in this one, but hopefully bear with me. So waiver wire additions that I like at quarterback are Geno Smith. I think this kind of goes without saying. The Seattle offense replacing Russell Wilson, there's obviously a lot of opportunity there. And I do like Smith as an ad because I think that this team is going to be passing quite a bit because the running game is not very strong right now. So Smith is a good ad to consider. I wouldn't spend a ton of money on him necessarily, but I think this is a good stopgap option for streamers, especially depending on the matchup. Other guys I like as well are the Miami Dolphins players. So you have Jacoby Brissett is a considered guy to add going up against Jacksonville next week. He could have a good game. I think he's worth consideration as a waiver wire stream. And then Tua, if you are really hurting for quarterbacks, you could take a flyer on him as an IR stash. Expected to be out for this game, but I believe he's expected to return for week 7 according to reports. Taylor Heineke, bad game last week, but he's got the Chiefs next week. Should have a better bounce back game in my opinion too. Other tricks out there that I'm not entirely high on. Mike Glennon, not a mobile quarterback for one, and then two, he's got the Rams next week. I just don't think that's going to go well for him at all, especially with all those injuries that they have to their running back and receivers. Just stay away from him. And then Davis Mills, I don't know how he had a game like that. That was totally surprising, but he's also had a 4-interception game. I would just personally not attempt to stream him. Indianapolis is a serviceable enough defense that I could very well see it going the complete bad direction for him where he just has a horrible game. I would just avoid him. Running backs. The number one guy that I like is actually not Devontae Booker. It's Darrell Williams. And this is totally because of the offense. The Chiefs have struggled this season. They did not play well on Sunday night. But Darrell Williams is the best option, in my opinion, because of the explosiveness of this offense. And I think that if anything were to keep Clyde Edwards-Helaire out for a long time, Darrell Williams has the most upside. He's already got a decent pass-down role. He's already been pretty involved, even with Edwards-Helaire there. So I think Williams would pretty much take over the running back one position for this team, which obviously gives him a ton of upside there. Devontae Booker, I rank at 2 because I think Booker is going to have some good opportunity with Saquon there, but this offense is significantly downgraded going up against the Rams for 1, 2, Mike Glennon, 3, almost all of their receiving options injured. So I'm worried Devontae Booker could be a trap for week 6 because of the matchup, but he does have a lot of upside because he is the clear running back 1 with Saquon out. Other guys to consider, check if A.J. Dillon is out there and pick him up. He must be added, in my opinion. Other players to consider as well, Ramondre Stevenson. We'll have to monitor Damien Harris's injury, but he got a large bulk load of the carries when Harris was out. Other guys to consider as well, if you're in a pinch that have PPR value. Giovanni Bernard, Jeremy McNichols, David Johnson, and Brandon Bolden. Those are all guys that are bench to waiver level options that are serviceable enough, in my opinion, if you really need a running back that have some upside. Of those guys, I like Giovanni Bernard the most because of the offense, but I think that don't underestimate guys like David Johnson and Jeremy McNichols too, because they have had pretty good passing down roles with their teams and could be involved, especially in games where they're likely going to be coming from behind. Wide receivers on waivers. I like Kadarius Toney the most, and this is 1 because he had a great game last week, but 2, the Giants are depleted in their entire wide receiver core. We don't know if Sterling Shepard and Slayton are coming back yet, and Golladay looks like he's going to be out for quite a bit of time. So Toney has a great opportunity, but he's going to likely draw Jalen Ramsey though, which is a potential concern. But if this receiving core stays as injured as it does, he's still worth an add, even if it is going to be a tough matchup potentially. Rondale Moore I like, but I don't really like starting him. I just think that he's a guy that you could potentially flip off a really good game because considering this offense, but I think he is still worth an add, especially with Max Williams' injury. He is a guy to consider to buy. Tim Patrick, if he's out there as well, been very consistent, much like Hunter Renfrow. Definitely try to pick him up. Other guys that are good options to consider if you're on buys. DeAndre Carter for Washington. He did pretty well against the Saints, and he's going to have the Chiefs next week. So he is a speculative addition for somebody who could go off for a big game. Not sure if it's likely, but if you're in very deep leagues, it's worth considering. Same thing with Byron Pringle for the Chiefs. Washington has been equally as bad in the pass defense. He could break out for a big game, but I generally would not count on that. Rashad Bateman is somebody to consider for the Baltimore Ravens. They've got the Chargers next week, which is expected to likely be a high-scoring game. Jalen Reagor, good ad going up against the poor Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. Reagor has mostly been dropped in a lot of leagues, but he is the second wide receiver on this team, in my opinion. And then other guys that I like that I would pick up, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I've talked about him a little bit in my last video I made yesterday, but Amon-Ra St. Brown I like as a guy emerging from the Lions receiving core and has some good opportunities to step up there. He's been generally getting more involved every week, and the Bengals, who they played in week 6, just got annihilated by Davante Adams. Tricks out there. Chris Moore for the Texans. I would not roster somebody off a game like that. It was just one bomb play, and that was pretty much it. And then the Saints receivers, it's not worth picking them up on a bye, in my opinion. That would be Deontay Harris and Marquez Callaway. Tight ends. Hunter Henry, likely rostered, but if he's still out there, I think he's a good ad going into this week. They got Dallas next week, which they're going to probably be passing quite a bit because they're going to be behind. So consider that. Similar situation with Washington and Ricky Seals-Jones. They will likely be behind in that game, and Seals-Jones got quite a bit of volume in the game against New Orleans. Dan Arnold, very similarly with Jacksonville, is starting to step up as their top tight end. They traded for him. They want to get him involved. Consider that as well. Gerald Everett, potential consideration too, was out because of COVID, may have been dropped in a lot of leagues, so consider adding him. Donald Parham Jr., if you are willing to wait on a tight end, he is stepping up over Jared Cook as the preferred tight end on a very explosive offense. Really like Donald Parham. But stay away from David Njoku, in my opinion, because I just think that this Cleveland Browns offense is just all over the place in terms of who is going to get opportunity and when. I'm not buying that is going to be consistent production from him. Defenses. I like Dallas. If Dallas is still out there, pick them up because they've completely flipped the image that they've had last year being a bad defense. And they get the Patriots next week, which is a team that is definitely limited on offense. I think that could be a very good stream option for you. Other ones I like are Indianapolis, which is generally not a great defense, but they get Houston next week, which is a team that, aside from the Patriots game for whatever reason, has been mostly bad this season, especially if Davis Mills is going to be quarterback again. So consider adding Indianapolis. I'm not high on Pittsburgh, but there is some upside if they're playing Geno Smith and he is turnover prone. But, I mean, Pittsburgh has been highly disappointing as a defense this year, but they do have a lot of upside with Minkah Fitzpatrick and TJ Watt if they can get it together. Guys I don't like are the Miami-Jacksonville game. You can make arguments for either team that, the offense is bad, so the defense should have a good game. But in general, that doesn't really work because if the defense is bad, they're probably going to stay bad. Drop candidates. So close out this video. I would drop Jameis Winston on a bye if you're not able to sell him. I don't think it's worth rostering him through week 6. He is a guy I would definitely consider dropping. Other guys I would consider dropping too is Derek Carr if you are in a situation where you need a quarterback. He's coming off 2 bad weeks. I don't think it's worth rostering him if you already have a couple guys and you feel that you don't need Carr anymore to pick up a running back or wide receiver or whatnot. Running backs to drop. I already talked Trey Sermon. Kenyon Drake you could safely drop too. You think that he can turn around, especially with the contract they gave him this offseason, but for whatever reason they're not involving him. I would not voice a pick on him unless you own Josh Jacobs. Sorry, not waste a pick. I mean, I would not roster him unless you own Josh Jacobs. Wide receivers, Brandon Ayuk, you don't need to roster anymore. Kenny Golladay, just injury after injury after injury. I would personally not want to deal with that anymore. I would drop him. Tight ends, I personally don't think you need to roster Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert, and you can drop both of them. But I would still try to see what value you can get in a trade because they are relatively well known. Austin Hooper, I don't think you can roster him if he wasn't targeted in this game. And then CJ Uzomah, disappointing game. coming off a great Thursday night game. I don't think it's worth holding on to him anymore. And then defense, San Francisco's defense, not really been a standout defense so far, and it's not worth holding them through the bye. I would cut them. So that's all I got for this video. A little long in this one, but wanted to cover a lot of points leading up to week 6. So if you have any questions about players and what to do, comment below. I make a video every Saturday morning where I discuss fans' comments who have questions, and I go in depth about what to do with their start and sit decisions. So if you have start sit decisions as well as trade questions, etc., comment below and I will reply to you and help you out with it. That's all I got for this video. Stay tuned for next time, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.